Hi, everybody. It's Katie Harris, owner and CEO of NrC&x, and I'm here with Dr. Nicole Caillier. Did I say that right?
You did, yes.
Okay. Awesome. So, Nicole, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everybody what it is that you do, because I know they're very excited about this topic.
Absolutely. So I am Dr. Nicole Caillier, and I live in the healthcare staffing space. I actually teach entrepreneurs and nurses how to launch, grow, and thrive in healthcare, in the healthcare staffing industry.
Yeah. So I think, one of the first times that I met you, I was talking about how, I thought the staffing industry was so intimidating. Can you talk a little bit about what it's like to get started in staffing industry and how good it is?
Absolutely. So if I can, Katie, is it okay if I just give a little bit of my background and how I got into staffing in the first place?
Yes, please.
Awesome. So like many of your community members, I was a nurse and I had climbed this corporate nursing ladder for a long time. And I thought I had arrived, right? I had dreams of being an entrepreneur, but I kept getting promotions. And my last promotion was an opportunity that was highly coveted. And I was excited about it because they said, Nicole, you're going to have flexibility, right? I had my own office. I'm leaving bedside nursing. And so I thought, this is it. And I remember, thinking I'll start my business on the side because, hey, now I have more flexibility. But I went in one day, Katie, to talk to my supervisor about how do I tap into this flexibility that you promised me? And we had this amazing conversation. So I thought 55 minutes later, she comes into my office. Her demeanor has changed and she had paperwork in her hands and she proceeds to terminate me.
Why?
Let me say this, right? Now I understand it. So the promotion that I got was really dealing with a lot of highly sensitive data for the healthcare organization. And at that time, I was beginning to generate revenue for the facility. So I understand that it was kind of a security measure based on our conversation, which was misinterpreted hugely, right? But in that moment, I didn't understand it. So she terminated me, walked me out of the building in front of my nursing colleagues. I'm sure you can relate to this, right? The nurses station can be probably the most dangerous, volatile place in some instances. So everyone's looking at me, probably thinking, what did she steal? What happened? And here it is. I'm trying not to cry and I'm grappling with those same thoughts myself. And I remember standing on that parking lot thinking, how did this happen? How did you go from getting a promotion, being a raise, having a successful nursing career to now you are being fired? And in that moment, I'm standing between, you've got to picture this. There's healthcare facilities on either side of me. I could have easily, I had the accolades, I had the reputation. I could have went to either one of them and got another job. But I heard the inside, right? The internal witness saying, start the business, start the business. I had always wanted to start a healthcare staffing firm. And what better time than after I lost my own job, right? To start a business helping other nurses find jobs, because that makes sense, right? So I got into this industry, honestly, after being handed a pink slip unexpectedly and making a decision for myself 17 years ago that I was going to be in control of my time, income, and freedom, but I still wanted to have a voice and gain authentic ownership and utilize my nursing background in a different capacity.
That's a great story. So I can just imagine this woman coming in and you're like, you want flexibility? Here's your flexibility. You're now very flexible. Wow. So why did you want to start a staffing agency, like on the side? What were you thinking there? And in retrospect, do you think it would have been possible for you to do it while you were doing that job?
I absolutely think it would have been possible for me to do it while doing the job. However, I don't know that I would have had the level of success. And I always tell people, when you hear that story, that doesn't mean go quit your job and go all in, right? It worked for me. But that's not what I'm advocating. What I do believe is that all work works. And so I do think that, yes, it probably would work. It could work, right? But would it have worked to the level and degree that it has? That's a question that remains unanswered. I'm sorry, what was the first part of your question, Katie?
Yeah, no, that was my question. Like, so the question that I have is, why staffing agency? What were you thinking there? And was it something that you could easily get into?
Yeah, so I had always done work in staffing agencies, kind of on the side to supplement all these wonderful opportunities and positions that I had. And so one of the things that was always interesting to me is that most of the staffing agencies that I worked for, they focused on these huge quantity of nurses, right? And so I can remember thinking when I was working that I always wanted to be able to impact the industry, but provide a different level of quality and bring that into the staffing industry. And I saw so many firms that were not nurse owned, right? We understand that you don't necessarily have to be a nurse to own a healthcare staffing firm. But I thought, what a great advantage to understand the problem on an intimate level, but also to be a part of the solution.
Yeah. It's funny that you say that, because I was just recently at a conference and there was a couple staffing agency people there. So I went up to talk to them and I'm like, oh, well, so how are you different? And the guy's like, oh, we answer the phone. And I was like, okay, but what else? I'm like, are you nurse owned or something? And he's like, no, we answer the phone. I'm like, okay. So in kind of relation to that question, like, what is your feeling about the number of staffing agencies that are out there, and what is kind of the opportunity for nurses to do something like this?
Well, so as you know, even in a post-pandemic world, the opportunity is vast. But if I'll be honest with you, pre-pandemic, the opportunity was pretty vast as well. Mm-hmm. And so I would say that I kind of equate staffing agencies to churches, right? So there's one on every corner, but somebody's going to go in one or the other for different reasons. And so the advice I always give to our mentees and individuals we have the opportunity to work with is that identify yourself and carve out a niche for yourself so tight in the marketplace that you're the only one who really fits into it, right? And so there's this tendency for entrepreneurs to get into this industry and want to go broad and want to serve everyone. And the truth is, we have found unprecedented success by really being very niche and very focused on one particular market. And that is also how we've built our curriculum as well. And so right now, and I'm sure your community would agree with this, nurses are looking for the same opportunities that we're all looking for: more time, more freedom, and more income. And everyone's not going to go out and build a gigantic staffing enterprise. There are some individuals who are going to turn to staffing firms, and that's going to be their version of autonomy. And so I see this industry as a growing industry, and there's unprecedented growth, I think, for the up and coming years.
Okay. So you don't think the industry is like oversaturated?
No. In fact, there's a guy, he's a fitness guru out of Atlanta, and he always says, the market is saturated if you think it is, and if you don't think it is, it's not. So it goes back into carving out and finding your lane in the marketplace and being as specialized and as niche as possible. And we've seen great success, not only in our own endeavors, but also in so many of the firms that we've had the opportunity to help develop.
Okay. So yeah, so maybe tell me about those. So I'm assuming that your niches are better than, we answer the phone. Tell us a little bit about some of the nurses that you've helped start staffing agencies with.
Absolutely. So one of my favorite stories is there was a nurse who reached out to us. In fact, this was pre-pandemic. And she reached out to us and said she wanted to get into the healthcare staffing space, and she didn't know how. She was working 2 jobs, very specialized. She had the credentials, she had the accolades, right? She had the entire story, but she knew that that was not sustainable. I think she was doing something like 80 hours a week and being a mom, right? And trying to have a life at the same time. And so she reached out and said that she wanted to get into the healthcare staffing industry. She had looked at this industry kind of from the sidelines for a number of years, had identified us as a potential resource. And so she reached out and so ended up being a part of our program and launched a healthcare staffing firm within a couple of weeks. The reason that I love her story is because I got to speak with her during the pandemic. And what she told me was, she said, Nicole, first of all, she's doing amazing. At the last time I talked to her, she had billed like over $100,000 for the week, right, in her staffing firm. But what is more important than that, she had a daughter who had a severe health condition whose doctor told her during the pandemic that if her daughter would have potentially been exposed to the virus, that it could have been life-threatening because she was already compromised. So when she reached out to us, yes, she was excited about having a week where she billed over $100,000 in revenue. But what was more rewarding as a mother was that she was able to leverage her skill set, be at home with her daughter, generate revenue, right, and maintain all during the pandemic without having to make a choice between her daughter's health potentially and her career. And so those stories are so life-changing and rewarding to hear when you hear someone, one of our other clients, he's not a nurse, but his wife was a nurse and kind of pushed him. He had some of the entrepreneurial skill set and pushed him to get into the industry. And he had been traveling corporate America. And so he told this story about having to leave and go and kind of being that dad that was out there providing, but missing these sentinel moments with his children. And he said, you know, there was a moment that my kids climbed into bed with me one morning. And he said, you know, I lost it because I'm thinking I'm supposed to be somewhere. Oh my God, I missed a corporate client. I missed an appointment. He had forgotten, right? He was so programmed in that corporate grind that he literally forgot, like, wait a minute. We started a staffing agency. I don't need to be anywhere right now. And this is what we started it for. He realizes his whole family is in the bed with him, right? His wife, his kids. And it's just one of those days that it didn't matter. He got to prioritize what was important, but he still got to serve the industry by giving nurses who wanted the time, freedom, and income to choose where they want to work, how they want to work. But they got to do that inside of his business. And so how amazing to create that win, not only for yourself, but knowing you're creating a win for someone else, and you're creating a win for the facility at the same time, who is depending on any nurse to show up, right? So that they can operate their business successfully.
Absolutely. So for those of you that are joining us, we're talking about how to grow a staffing agency with Dr. Nicole Caillier. And hopefully I'm saying that right still. So absolutely ask us some questions, anything that you have. And we're just going to keep talking, but I do have one question here for you, such as how would you be able to do nurse staff agency for private duty nurses that can bill the Forward Health portal for Medicaid program? Did you get all that?
Yeah, I actually did. And that's not really an area of specialty for us. We really focus on the facility side and just providing supplemental staffing within healthcare organizations, nursing homes, assisted living, hospitals, rehabs, correctional facilities, schools, right? But they're organizations that are directly responsible for the reimbursement of services versus the state.
Okay. So why don't you give us a little kind of roadmap layout, how does a nurse go from thinking this sounds like a really good idea to, I don't know, billing $100,000 a week?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I will say this. Okay. So anytime, and I've had the opportunity now to work with hundreds of firms throughout the country. And there are three consistent things that make a healthcare staffing firm successful. I don't care if they walk in the door with a multi-million-dollar firm, as some of our clients have, but they had reached a place of stagnation. I go back through this same process with every client, right? So at the bottom is the baseline. This is the infrastructure. This is the foundation of the business, right? This is what is making the business work. This would include things like legal. This is your infrastructure. Legal, administrative, operational, and kind of your processes, what you're doing on a day-to-day basis. Those are at the core, okay? The second thing is people, right? So I have the right people in place. Do you have the right people? Who are your people? Not just externally, but internally as well, right? So once we have a great foundation, we move to the people. And then after we've identified the right people, put people in the right seats and remove the wrong people, then we go through the processes. What are the processes that are going to help us to create not just success for this year, but sustainable success, long-term success, success that allows us to at some point become franchisable or expand, right? So those are the three areas that are really important to growth. And this is what I call my success triangle. I don't know if you could see it, right? So if you try to grow your staffing firm and any of these are off kilter, if you will, that business is going to potentially implode. You might be saying, okay, Nicole, how do you know this? Right? Because I did it. When I started my business, I was fresh off the nursing floor. I had no entrepreneurial dexterity, no training. I just thought, well, a staffing agency is a contract with a facility and an LLC. And so I ran with that for a number of years. Thankfully, 2 years in, I met a man who started telling me, like, Nicole, is this a real business? It's not a real business. And I'm like, dude, I'm making money. It's a real business, right? But he's asking me questions like, how does it work? Why does it work? Why are you doing this? And I'm like, I don't know. Well, I didn't listen to him. And after building a healthcare staffing firm, making hundreds of thousands of dollars, I found myself working as a janitor, right?
Wow.
Now, that guy ended up being my husband. Okay, I had gotten married during this process, and he had a commercial cleaning company, and I was working as a janitor for him because when I left my nursing job, I said I would never do bedside nursing again. So my pride would not allow me to now be in this state of having a failing healthcare staffing firm and going back into the profession as a bedside nurse. And also my spirit, right, internally said, Nicole, this business can work, right? I still had that internal knowing, like, it's not over. So one of the things he told me was to kind of pay attention to what he was doing. And I thought, why do I need to pay attention to you? You run a commercial cleaning company at the time. Like, what sense does that make? But he understood business. And so I started paying attention. And he said, I will help you rebuild this thing if you are willing to get out of your way. And so I did that. And getting out of my way looked like me studying this time management, leadership, business, right? Cycles of business, understanding profit, revenue, all the things that I didn't understand before. I just thought because I'm a nurse and I'm passionate about the industry and I've managed to land a contract and a few people like me and decided to work for us, right? I thought this is going to work forever, but thankfully it imploded. And someone was wise enough to say, hey, you have a great ideal here, but it is just that. Even though you're making money, it is not a fully developed business model that is going to be sustainable. So as I would work as a janitor for him every day, I would pay attention to how he ran his operations. I would pay attention to his interactions with his team. I would pay attention to the things he was listening to, what he was studying, and things like that. And then one day I decided now I'm ready to go back, right? And that lasted for several months. But when I stepped back into my staffing firm, I stepped in with a higher level of information, right? And a higher perspective, and was able to rebuild. In fact, within 24 months, we went from being a local company to a national company because of that. So if you're asking, how does someone grow a healthcare staffing firm? You've got to start with the right infrastructure. You've got to have the right people, and you've got to develop the right processes. And if any of that is done out of sequence and out of order, this is why I show the triangle, right? And you try to put more weight on this, and this triangle is not fused together firmly, it's going to implode.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And it's really, really important too, because that infrastructure is, I love that story, first of all, but that's really powerful. And I also, appreciate you sharing that, because it is a vulnerable story. We all want everybody to think that we're always successful. And, in business, it is about, one, learning to get out of your way, because 99% of the time, the problem is yourself in business. And, two, that it's a learning process. And one of the things that I love that you offer here is to take nurses, because they don't have business background. We all know that we didn't get any business background, and it doesn't help that our pay is tied to the bedside. So we never see money in healthcare, and we don't understand always how it works. So knowing that you can take somebody that's completely green, if you will, in business, and show them, this 3-step process to get it up and running the right way the first time is so powerful. I have a couple of questions here too, because I want to make sure I get these in. Interested if you employ nurses W-2 versus 1099?
Yeah, so there's a lot of variables with that. Some states it's really frowned upon to use the 1099 method. In some areas it's not, right? And so again, that would be something that would be specific to the area, best practices. So we see both being done successfully, but there could potentially be compliance regulations that would need to be considered when someone's determining whether they want to directly employ or contract.
Yeah. And I would say, early on for me, that was a big question too. Or do I hire people W-2 or 1099? But now it's like I have Gusto, which is super inexpensive, and they take care of all the state taxes and stuff. And it just, it works out nicely. And it's not as big of an issue in a lot of ways that I think, kind of going into it for the first time, it feels overwhelming.
Yeah.
What type of insurance coverage are you required to have as an RN staffing agency?
Yeah, so typically your general insurances, of course, again, so let me say this, because I get a lot of questions. And one of the things that inspired me to even continue teaching, I thought I was going to teach one class 4 years ago and go back to my life. And that hasn't happened. But one of the things, and thankfully, right, it's been such an honor to be able to serve so many nurses and entrepreneurs in this capacity. But one of the things I try to be very cautious about is answering questions without having a lot of context.
Yeah.
And the reason I'm still here, right? I was in a group and someone was asking questions about a staffing agency, and the questions were really great questions. And there was someone attempting to respond to those questions. Now, probably had really good intentions. I could tell they were experienced in the staffing industry, right? But I'm almost 20 years in now, right? So my perspective's a lot different. And every time a question would pop up, for me, a series of other questions would pop up. And this gentleman was just giving out random answers. And I thought, how does he know exactly? Like, he's telling them these things which seem to make sense, but in the grand scheme of things, they could be detrimental. And so I don't want to give someone advice without knowing exactly where they are, because again, your insurance is going to be predicated on your structure, right? So you may have to have certain insurances if you have employees versus contractors. So all of those things work together in tandem, right? Yes. And you protect yourself in different ways according to how you structure your agency. Is that helpful?
That is a good answer. And let's see. Hi, Dr. Nicole. Can you talk about software, apps, charges, contracting, financial backing, payroll options, advertising, and marketing, and in one sentence?
Yeah, I love it. And that would be, we are talking about now, I'll be honest, and I'll give you my best response, right? I've been in this thing now for, my team calculated a little over 40,000 hours.
Oh, wow.
And so, right, we would need a good 15 years to go through all of that.
Yes. Yeah, and that, all that stuff again is relative to, you know, what kind of agency you're setting up and how you're setting it up, and yeah, it's a lot. Advertising and marketing. I mean, you can get a PhD in marketing in one tiny little area, so it's kind of a big question. Do you work directly with clients, or does your team?
It really depends on where the different stages. So everything within our organization, we work with, we have an application process. And then based on that application process and where an individual or entrepreneur is in their journey, we make recommendations regarding where we think we could be of the best service to them and what makes sense. So there's always individuals who want to go for the private, kind of high level, high touch in the beginning. And honestly, when we get into their model, they really need to go back to the beginning stages of infrastructure. If I have time, I'd love to share a story because I think it'll help. One of our previous clients, an amazing client, had substantial success in the industry, but had bought into kind of a franchise, if you will. And so he bought the staffing firm. It was doing remarkably well, great in terms of revenue. He comes to me and says, we're stagnant. I don't know how to grow this thing. Can you help me? And our team did an assessment and kind of said, okay, this is where you need to be. And he says, no, the firm is doing well. I need to go and do these things. And once again, we run it through our process. Okay, infrastructure, people, processes. Where do you need to be? And for us, it was clear it was infrastructure because it was working. But just like I was in 07, it's working, but he has no idea why it's working. Like many of the questions, he couldn't really give us a solid answer in. And so he went off and kind of did his own thing. He came back almost a year later to tell me that he was almost in bankruptcy. And I went, what happened? And he says, you know, we weren't able to grow it. Things started happening, losing clients. He had information. He did not have revelation. He did not understand the principles that make not only a staffing firm, but any business work. And so we entered a relationship with him. But again, we went back to infrastructure. And so he sent a testimonial in July of 2021, just saying how thankful he was that we were consistent, because what he needed, he had gaps in the infrastructure and we had to rebuild his staffing firm. He's like crossed the 7-figure mark a couple times. I mean, amazing story. But I share that because so many times as entrepreneurs, we try to grade our own paper and we don't know where to start. We don't know what we need. You just said this, right? And so we have a process that kind of allows us to be able to walk through the journey with an aspiring or emerging entrepreneur to let them know our recommendations for getting them started.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's so important. And, you know, it's funny how many times that happens. I just talked to a woman, just a couple hours ago who was interested in, business. And I was like, well, we need to start with, the basics with your audience and your message. And she's like, oh no, I already have that. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, I'm reading it right now and I'm not getting it. So, yeah, but, they want to sometimes argue with you, and it's just kind of like, you have to go back to the basics. And that's what my chairman always used to say too. Like, you start at the basics and make sure all of this is in place. And when you come to somebody to help you, you have to let them go through the process, because the process that you have created over your 20 years of experience and know exactly when something's going to, it's not in place. It's kind of like when you take your car to get fixed, you're not like, oh, don't bother looking at the brakes, I already checked them myself or something. It's like, no, you let them do their thing. So I have a couple more. I got a lot of questions coming up here. So what kind of business structure did you use, and how did you come up with your contracts agreements that you use with RNs?
Yeah, so I'll say, and in fact, I just did a training on this morning. So after I had that period in 07 where I lost everything and had to rebuild and really do an assessment on the business structure, there are 4 pillars that I have deemed are important to developing a healthcare staffing firm. And those pillars are your legal, your administrative, your operational, and execution. Right. And that's it. That is me being extremely simple for the sake of time, and not wanting to confuse anyone. But legal would be your first, administrative, operational, and execution. That is what was developed out of that season of me having to start over and really rework my mindset from being a nurse with contracts to being an entrepreneur who happens to be a nurse.
Right.
And there's a huge difference.
So I have people asking questions about whether you can share like handouts and forms. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how you help nurses in this field? And let's go there.
Yeah, so what we do, we've actually just, the marketplace has been phenomenal. I was telling you before that when I started this, I started it because of that righteous indignation. I saw these people saying random things and knowing that they could be giving the right information, but the right information, even at the wrong time, right, is not beneficial. And so I remember thinking, I'm going to just teach this class one time. And then it was another time. And now here we are 4 years in, 400 healthcare staffing firms, and growing. And it has been phenomenal. What we did was we went in and curated a program to walk nurses through the process of launching a healthcare staffing firm with guidance and support, and actually walking you through all of these pillars, right? But one of the things that I knew was important as a former nurse is that the business dexterity, that arm, we've also built into our curriculum, because I understand what it is to be passionate about the industry, what it is to love the nursing industry, but I understand what that mindset is also, right? So how do I still have all the characteristics that made me successful as a nurse, but then refine that so that I can be an entrepreneur, right? You know, the empathy, all of these things, right? And so that is built into our program. And I really think that has been the key component to the success and the success stories that so many individuals have shared with us. It's because it's not just about healthcare staffing. It is really giving people entrepreneurs rather, a lesson in entrepreneurship, the right skills, the right tools, right? But the right mindset to really give them a fair advantage. And so we have that program. We work with entrepreneurs in 3 different ways, through private consulting, through a semi-private mentorship opportunity, and then occasionally we'll have programs like on-demand programs that they can invest in depending on where they are. And so it would be important for them to connect with our team so that we could kind of steer them, gather some more information, but also steer them in the appropriate direction in terms of the program that would make the most sense for them.
Okay. I just want to do a clarification because I had somebody say, are we live? I don't see those questions, but we're streaming on multiple different platforms. So yes, we are live. And if you do have a question, please put them in, because we got Nicole here and we can ask her anything that you guys want, and see what she has to say. Let's see. Now, a lot of people do start asking about specific regulations in different states. And, you know, how do you answer those types of questions? I got one here on New York State in particular.
Yeah. So again, yeah, when it's very specific, it's more general questions are sometimes easier, just because, again, more specific questions require probably more questions. And I do want to make sure that the information is accurate and that I have a full understanding of where something is. So we do, and of course, before we end our conversation, we can share information for them to reach out to my team directly. But I prefer to answer questions that I think would be most valuable to the group entirely versus very specific questions.
Why don't you give us some of the should ask questions? What should people be asking you?
Should ask. Oh, goodness.
SAQ. So, I mean, I also, go ahead.
Sometimes I'm floored because I'll be in a room with someone and they're asking me all of these questions, and I'll share what I ask my mentor typically, right? So I'm a huge advocate of mentorship and coaching, right? I believe that every coach should have a mentor, right? Everybody who's leading people should have a leader. And so one of the things that I've learned to ask is exactly what you said. What should I be asking you? What is the question that what should I be considering right now that I'm not, right? But obviously we have a relationship, so there's information that he's privileged to, and that he can share based on that. So I do say asking about the things that you wouldn't know, right? Because you don't know what you don't know. And so that's a great question. One of the things that I think is underestimated, if I will say this, is there is not enough emphasis on the mindset of success. I have strategies, tools, and tactics. They work, right? But what is just as important, if not more important, is the right mindset. And having an opportunity to work with so many highly passionate healthcare professionals, I do realize that mindset works in the design of working in the nursing industry, healthcare, in the way that we serve. But it has to be refined tremendously in many instances to be able to serve our businesses well, and our facilities and our employees, right? And so I don't think a lot of times people are aware of how much that plays into the success of their staffing firm, how interrelated all these things are, right? They're just like, give me the tactics, give me the strategies, give me the strategies. But if you aren't the person who can actually implement the strategies, right? Then regardless of what we teach, share, and train, it's not going to have the same impact. And so we also have a huge emphasis, which is why we've built accountability into our programs, because we understand that people need a coach. You need someone to hold you accountable, to help build your confidence, to hold the space for you, just as much as you need the tactics and the strategies, right? So my first mentor, right, who actually ended up being my husband, was the person who did that for me. He saw what I did, what I was not able to see. And he challenged me to think like, Nicole, you are still thinking like a nurse, which is great if you're going to work as a nurse. But if you're telling me you're building this huge vision, this staffing enterprise, then there's got to be another thought process, and you've got to not just think about today. That is also something that I think is underestimated. I think the nurses are so passionate about the healthcare staffing industry, gaining that authentic ownership in the industry, but they aren't really forward thinking about the direction of the business 5 years or 10 years or even 20 years from now. So even through that adversity that I shared earlier, I had to go back to the drawing board and sit and think about what is the ultimate vision for the organization. What do I want this to look like in 10 years? What kind of impact, right? Yes, income, but what kind of impact do I want our organization to have in the healthcare staffing industries? And those things are important, because the more clarity you have, right, the more impact you'll be able to create.
Yeah, clarity is huge. And, what you're describing is stuff that I started out with. A lot of these issues was just the mindset, not being in the right mindset, or, having these ideas of what nurses do or don't do. And, like, I can do this, but I can't do that because nurses don't do that. And, my coaches would be like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't know, just making stuff up, and it was like, I spent so much money on like courses after courses after courses, and not implementing any of the strategies because the mindset wasn't there. So yeah, like I didn't stop buying courses, but I invested more heavily in coaches because, they do hold you accountable, and they do help you to the next step. Because a lot of times what happens, you hit an obstacle, and if you're on a course, you're just like, oh, well, I can't get over this obstacle. But a coach isn't going to let you get away with that,
Right.
All right. So what is it? Talk to us a little bit about your thoughts on, the staffing world right now. Like, what are your thoughts on, that whole thing with, the staffing agencies having their hours capped or their salary capped, and what about facilities canceling contracts around the country? Does that still make it a good time to start a staffing agency?
So it's interesting that you said that, because I just taught a group earlier this morning, and one of the things I told them is that every major transition in our organization, every time the trajectory changed, it was following a crisis, right? So I launched my staffing firm right after Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, and everybody around me was going, right, and we're in the Gulf Coast, so we were impacted, and everybody's like, what are you thinking? Like, this is crazy. We're in the middle of a crisis. Like, just go get a job, you know? And so that ended up being a great decision from a business perspective to start at that time. Even though other firms were making other decisions, we went national right after the recession, while I watched other firms close their doors, right? And so sometimes I jokingly say, because some of my industry friends will say, Nicole, oh my God, you're doing amazing. How are you doing this? And I'm like, listen, I just outlasted half the people, right? Because they quit somewhere along the way. They convinced themselves that, whatever, and they decided to get out of the game. And then the others, I got the education I needed. I made the investments. You just talked about investing into your mentors. I can remember the first time that I got a report from my accountant, and I had invested $250 million, $250,000 into educating myself about leadership, entrepreneurship. And this was like in 1 year. And that year was record breaking for our organization. And I could see the correlation that the more education I have, my business was rising and I was able to make better decisions. And so now in a post-pandemic world, because I've heard so many of these things before, right? The staffing industry is this, the staffing industry is that. Like, I've been around for a long time. I look at it and I study it much like an investor studies Wall Street or the stock markets. And for me, I see an incline in staffing, right? And there are places that you may need to pivot. But again, we're entrepreneurs. Creativity is what we're born to be creative, right? And so those firms that are going to succeed are going to be firms that aren't necessarily listening to the narrative, but they're willing to make the pivots and the adjustment and just follow the course, right? And go through the doors that open. So what do I personally think? I personally feel like staffing agencies are increasing in business, because at the same time all these regulations are being imposed, or there's the threat or potential, you still have nurses that are now saying, I've got to do this a different way. And so even though, you've got to understand, these conversations I've heard for 10, 15 years all the time, right? And we've built businesses and grown businesses in the midst of these conversations. So I also think it's what you choose to focus on. In a post-pandemic world, I fully expect there will be some firms that this will change the trajectory of their lives and their families' lives in their firms. Absolutely.
Right? Yeah, no, it's really powerful. And that was the lesson that I learned from my coach too. So in April of 2020, when everything was shutting down, we were launching IV hydration, which is, in-person clinics, brick and mortar, and, buying ads, because everybody stopped buying ads. One, they were the cheapest ads we ever had. And two, that was the biggest cohort we ever had. Like, the nurses came in because there was that one belief in, just the economy and the country, and the thing that this is just a pass. This is going to pass too. This too shall pass, right? And that they wanted to be in that position where, when the pandemic was over, or started to open up. But some of those IV hydration nurses that started with us ended up doing. They very quickly put stuff together and were started to sell like COVID tests. And the COVID test, or the mobile COVID test, was like this huge boom. I mean, you know, it's not so much a thing anymore, but it was like this huge boom that was so inexpensive for them. And it brought in money where that would never have happened if they hadn't taken, you know, they didn't have the belief that things would work out. And that's when you talk about mindset, believing that things, you know, just having that unshakable optimism that things are going to work out for you, and believing that they're going to work out if you're persistent, consistent, and just generally, you know, like, I don't mean to say that you just make willy-nilly decisions. If you have bad decision making, you're going to have problems, but, you know, really believing in yourself and that it can work, and getting the right people in place will make all the difference.
Absolutely. And Katie, if I can add to that, at the beginning of the pandemic, I started getting phone calls. I mean, our phones just exploded. And it was organizations, really, it was a lot of organizations, but in particular, I had a group of investors that I was talking to, billionaires, right? And I really started paying attention because there was this community where everybody was freaking out and talking and focusing on what wasn't, and the changes and all of that. And then I'd get on these weekly calls with these gentlemen who they're an investment group, all billionaires, and their questions and their conversation was totally different. And one day they said, Nicole, you know something about healthcare staffing, and we need to know what that is, right? And so we started having this conversation about the economy of staffing and things like that. And so what it did for me, it wasn't just an opportunity for me to give them insight and share my personal thoughts and views, but it also showed me how, you know, they're much further down the road than I am, but what they were paying attention to as the economy was shifting. And they were looking for opportunities to invest in healthcare staffing. They were looking for opportunities to collaborate in healthcare staffing. And so it immediately told me that these economists and people that study wealth trends and things like that, they were trying to tap into this market heavily, and still are. And so sometimes if you don't know what to do, you need to look at the people who know what to do and do what they're doing.
Kind of like when there's turbulence on the airplane, you look to the flight attendants, and if they're not freaking out, then you don't freak out.
Yeah, I got a huge insight from just collaborating with them.
Yeah, that's powerful. And, you know, it's always the entrepreneurs that, you know, the really solid entrepreneurs, like what you're talking about, these millionaires, billionaires, that they have this optimism in the economy. They have the trust that things are going to work out, that are, you know, the government's not going to come in and take everything from you. You know, not every country has that, but that's why, you know, the US has thrived as much as it has, you know, not because we're the best, but because we have that spirit of optimism and trust. So we believe in that things are they're going to look up, they're going to look better. There's always something over the horizon to hope for. And I think that's really, really powerful.
Absolutely.
All right. So Nicole, start telling us about, like, how does somebody kind of work with you? What would that look like? Would they get started? What would they do? Where would they go? That kind of stuff.
Yeah. So the first thing would be actually submitting an application or inquiry to our community. And that can be found on our website, which NicoleCaillier.com. I see you have launchmystaffingfirm.com up. That might be it also. But we do have an application process. We always want to make sure, you know, when I was asked to start teaching this in 2018, I was a little reluctant. And up until that time, I had really been in my office, you know, enjoying building a staffing firm. And that was fine with me, right? Then I had my accountant saying, you should share this with individuals. And then I had nurses that started calling me saying, Nicole, how have you done this? We have watched you from the sidelines. And so I stepped into this space and began, of course, curating this curriculum. One of the things that I was intentional about, or let's say concerned about, was who do you share this body of work with, right? And so, Katie, you probably can relate to this. You've been an entrepreneur for quite some time. and you know what it takes to build from the ground up, right? When there is no mentor, you're figuring things out, you're putting things in place. And so I was just really concerned, like, I want to make sure that this body of work is shared with the individuals who have the same heart or similar and really want to serve the staffing space. Yes, make income, right? Yes, but also make an impact and also influence the direction of healthcare staffing. And so we created an application process just to make sure that we can filter through and get to those individuals, because our program success has been starting with the right person. And so once you submit that application, our team typically vets the application, and then they bring you through a series of steps which will point you in the right direction and the right program for you. And we do have countless opportunities that we have developed to be able to work with individuals on varying levels. I also work with established entrepreneurs, and this year I've been working with healthcare facilities as well, because some healthcare facilities already have a staffing system in place, and they need support on the other side, being able to create or expand their platform to really serve the needs of nurses that are already there, or to serve them better. And so there are various ways to get involved with our community and various paths, if you will, to influence and impact the healthcare staffing industry. But the first step would actually be to submit an application online, and our team would provide further direction.
Yeah, and that's, I think that's really powerful too, because this is a question that I get a lot. And in our courses, we don't necessarily vet people that come into the courses that they want to come in and take the course, that they can do that just through purchasing. But then I get people will say, well, how successful are the people in your courses? And that's a much harder question to answer, because there's a lot of people that are very successful. And then I have people that have never even opened the course, which blows my mind. But in terms of, our higher end programs where we do an application process, I mean, those nurses, have been very successful because, one, they have a coach, and two, they've been vetted, right? Like you want to work with people that that you can help. And, if you just take anybody, they might not implement. They might be like that guy who's, argues with you every step of the way, at first, and doesn't want to implement what you say. There has to be like a trusting relationship. Like they have to respect that what you're doing in your 20 years of experience. And, you're talking to billionaires, you're talking to healthcare staffing companies or different facilities. You're clearly a leader in the space and you understand it. So I think that's really powerful.
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, is it okay if I share something on that?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
So I remember getting a phone call from one of our mentees, like full transparency, right? My community knows that I am very transparent. I got a phone call and she's like, this doesn't work. It didn't work for me. I took the program and it just doesn't work. Okay. And this was like way back, maybe 2019. And so I started asking her I did everything you told me. And I said, can you tell me what class you were in? Remind me. So she gives me the class she was in. I go and look up the class, right? We keep our groups very intimate. And so there was maybe 15 people in the class with her. Well, her class produced our first 2 millionaires. So at the same time, she was calling me to say this.
Oh, Nicole, you froze. This was a good story too. I want to hear it. Hopefully she'll come back. So we're talking to Nicole Caillier from, she runs Robinson Success, NicoleCaillier.com, and she teaches nurses how to start nurse staffing agencies for nurses. And her website, if you want to find her roadmap, it's launchmystaffingfirm.com. I do see somebody's asking a question, is it a long time and process to launch your firm? Nicole has had students start and launch within several weeks, and then it can go on from there. And it's the same with us in our courses. I've had nurses start courses and launch within literally like 3 or 4 weeks. And then I've had students that take 6 months or longer. So that's kind of a hard question to answer in a lot of respects. It looks like she fell off, so just give her a minute to get back. But we are wrapping up here. So if you have more questions, you can definitely stick them in the comments. I'll make sure Nicole's answering the questions and, that she can help you out. The staffing agency, I think it's a really, really great industry. I don't know what her startup, let's see if she can answer that question for us. There you are. Hi, Nicole.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry, guys, technology. But what I want to share this, Katie, because I think it's important. So the young lady was saying that it didn't work, and there were 2 millionaires that were in the same program as her. So I reached back out to her and I asked her if she remembered them from being in her class. And she says, yes, I do. I said, well, I have 2 testimonials, not just testimonials. I have the data, I have the income statements, I have the screenshots, and I guarantee you this works because you guys had the same information. You went through the same classes. You had the same workbooks. The only variable is what you did with the information.
Right.
And so it's a formula, right? And so I'm not here saying, hey, you're going to get that's not what I'm saying. But what I definitely know is your probability of being successful is increased by 40,000 hours, right? And so again, just much like you're always going to have, you've got to do the work. You've got to put in the time, the effort, the resources. You have to be willing to invest in the resources to be successful, right?
Yep, absolutely. It's really powerful, and that's what I was just saying. As when you were off the air, and it's just, it really does come down. We had a similar situation where the nurse said that the course wasn't effective, and I sent her like 16 video testimonials of people that started their business. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know what to say. So it's the same concept, and it's across the board. So it's definitely something, I had one user had asked if it's a long time and process to launch your firm. And I said, you've had students start within weeks, and then also, it can take months, it could take years. You might never start your firm. Like it depends.
Yeah. So typically our program is 6 to 8 weeks. It's a very aggressive program. And the ideal is that you're launched within 30 days. Now, just as you said, there are individuals who take longer, right? Who want to go deeper with the information or for whatever reason. But it's structured and designed to be launched in 6 weeks. When I launched my first staffing firm, it took me about 90 days. And I had no idea what I was doing. Now, I don't recommend it, right? Because I DIY'd it and I paid for that many times over the first 2 years, just learning expensive lessons. But the right information definitely accelerates that time to get up and running.
It's so true. I made a video a couple times that I spent my first $30,000 trying to figure out what I didn't know. Ended up at square zero again. I had to start all over, and this time went with coaches. And I was like, that was just the biggest waste of money, trying to figure it out. So it's ridiculous. All right, Nicole. So if people want to learn more, they can go to launchmystaffingfirm.com. Are there other places you want to send them, or?
Yes, launchmystaffingfirm.com or NicoleCaillier.com are both accessible sites that will get you pointed and connected in the direction of our programs and our services.
Awesome. And if you guys have more questions, like I said, put them in the chat box. I'll make sure your questions get answered. And I want to thank everybody for being here with us today, and especially you, Nicole. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Katie. I love what you're doing here for nurses. Thank you.